A principled police chief, a divided town, a betrayal that burns everything to the ground. When Chief Elliot Vance pulls over a reckless driver on his way home, he expects nothing more than a routine stop. What he gets instead is a savage beating at the hands of two of his own officers, men blinded by hatred and emboldened by their badges. Left battered and humiliated on the roadside, Elliot watches in horror as his beloved car, a treasured link to his late wife, goes up in flames. But Elliot isn't just a victim. He's a survivor. And the men who attacked him made one grave mistake. They didn't finish the job. As Elliot uncovers a shocking conspiracy that reaches deep into the heart of his department, he must decide whether to trust a flawed justice system or take vengeance into his own hands. With every step closer to the truth, the line between law and justice blurs, and the cost of doing the right thing threatens to consume him. The late afternoon sun cast a golden glow over the winding road. Elliot Vance's 1972 Mustang hummed beneath him, the engine's purr as comforting as the memories it carried. He glanced at the worn leather seats, tracing his fingers along the stitching Dana had chosen. His late wife's laughter echoed in his mind, the way she'd teased him about restoring a relic. The Mustang wasn't just a car. It was a promise, a piece of their life together that he'd kept alive even after cancer had taken her. Now, as the trees blurred by, Elliot felt a mix of anticipation and unease. Braxton was home, but it was also a place of tension, a town divided by unspoken lines, where progress came slowly and resistance ran deep. His phone buzzed on the dashboard. With a glance, he saw the name, Frank Andrews. Picking it up, he hit the speaker button. "Frank," Elliot greeted. "I'm about 20 minutes out. How's the department holding up without me?" Frank's voice carried a hint of hesitation. "We're managing, Chief. But, there've been rumblings. Nothing solid, just tension in the air." "Tension is Braxton's specialty," Elliot said lightly, though Frank's tone stayed with him. "You'll see when you get back," Frank replied. "Just watch yourself." The call ended, and Elliot's grip tightened on the wheel. The Mustang roared as he pressed the gas. The quiet road stretched ahead, lined with dense forest on either side. Elliot let the hum of the engine soothe him, his thoughts drifting back to the reforms he planned for the department. It was time to address the festering culture he'd been battling since taking the chief's position. Suddenly, a blur of motion snapped him back to the present. A car sped past, swerving dangerously into his lane before jerking back. "What the—" Elliot muttered, slamming the brakes as the vehicle barely missed his Mustang. The car ahead weaved across the road, its erratic movements a clear danger. Elliot's police instincts kicked in. He reached for the portable blue light he kept in the passenger seat, placed it on the dashboard, and activated it. "Let's see what your problem is," he muttered, accelerating to catch up. The swerving car slowed abruptly and veered onto the gravel shoulder. Elliot pulled in behind it, stepping out with deliberate calm. His badge hung from his belt, his uniform crisp despite the long drive. As he approached, the driver's door opened, and a man stepped out, broad-shouldered, with a shaved head and a scowl etched into his face. Another man followed, lankier, his nervous energy evident in his darting eyes. Both wore police uniforms. "Something I can help you with, Chief?" The first man sneered, leaning against the car. Elliot stopped, his brow furrowing. "Marcus. Sean. Care to explain that stunt back there?" Marcus Tate chuckled, a low, mocking sound. "Didn't realize it was you, sir. Just out here, stretching our legs." Elliot's jaw tightened. "Stretching your legs? You nearly caused a collision. Both of you are in uniform, representing this department. Act like it." Sean Wilkes shifted uncomfortably, but Marcus didn't flinch. Instead, he stepped closer, his smirk widening. "Sure thing, Chief. But maybe you should worry about staying in your lane." Elliot's hand hovered near his badge. "Don't test me, Marcus. You're already on thin ice." The tension snapped like a live wire. Marcus shoved Elliot hard, sending him stumbling backward. "Thin ice, huh? You're not the one giving orders here." "Old man," Marcus spat, his voice dripping with contempt. Elliot straightened, his breath steady despite the adrenaline surging through him. "Stand down, both of you. This ends now." Sean hesitated, his gaze darting between Marcus and Elliot. Maybe we should just… Shut up, Marcus barked, shoving Sean aside. Before Elliot could react, Marcus lunged again, this time throwing a punch that caught him in the ribs. Pain shot through Elliot's side, but he didn't fall. He refused to. Is this what you think being an officer means? Elliot growled, his voice firm despite the pain. Marcus didn't answer. Instead, he swung again, and this time, Sean joined in, his kicks landing with hesitant but damaging force. Elliot fell to the gravel, his vision blurring as the blows continued. Breathing heavily, Marcus stepped back, wiping his knuckles on his pants. Sean hovered nearby, his face pale. "Let's go," Sean muttered. "We've done enough." "Not yet," Marcus said, his gaze shifting to the Mustang. "No," Elliot gasped, struggling to his knees. "Don't." Marcus ignored him, pulling a lighter from his pocket. He flicked it open, the flame dancing in the fading light. "Nice car," he said, his tone dripping with mockery. "Shame about the owner." Sean watched in horror as Marcus tossed the lighter onto the Mustang's seat. Flames erupted instantly, the fire licking at the interior with ravenous intensity. Elliot's world blurred as the heat washed over him. The Mustang burned, taking with it the last tangible piece of Dana. "You'll regret this," Elliot rasped, his voice barely audible. Marcus smirked. "Not likely." The two officers climbed into their car, leaving Elliot bleeding and broken in the gravel, the inferno behind him lighting the darkening sky. The night air was cold against Elliot's bruised skin, but it barely registered through the waves of pain coursing through his body. His chest heaved as he tried to push himself off the gravel road, but his arms trembled and gave out beneath him. "Get up, Vance," he muttered to himself through gritted teeth. His voice sounded distant, swallowed by the vast silence of the woods. "You've faced worse. You've survived worse." He wasn't sure if that was true. The pain in his ribs, his head, and his arms screamed otherwise. But lying there wasn't an option. Not after what they'd done to him. Not after watching Dana's car, their car, turn to ash. With a guttural groan, he rolled onto his side, clutching at the ground for leverage. Gravel bit into his palms, and his vision swam as he staggered to his knees. Each breath was a battle, his ribs protesting with sharp, stabbing pain. "Step one," he wheezed, forcing himself to his feet. His legs wobbled beneath him, but he managed to stand, swaying like a leaf in the wind. Step two was moving, and that seemed impossible. Elliot stumbled toward the ditch where Marcus and Sean had thrown his belongings. His phone lay smashed among the dirt and glass, the screen shattered but still faintly glowing. He bent down, biting back a cry as pain flared through his side. He picked up the phone, cradling it in his shaking hands. The lock screen was a mess of cracks, but he could see a single notification blinking. New voicemail. Fumbling, he tapped the play button. The speaker crackled, and a familiar voice filtered through the static. "No, man, we can't let him talk." If he… The message cut off with a beep. Elliot's brow furrowed, his pulse quickening despite the pain. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Enough to confirm what he'd suspected. This wasn't random. Marcus and Sean weren't just out of control. They were covering something up, and someone else was involved. "You're not getting away with this," he muttered, gripping the phone tightly as he turned toward the faint glow of Braxton in the distance. Elliot knew he couldn't walk along the road. If Marcus and Sean returned, or worse, if someone else from the department was in on this, he'd be an easy target. The woods offered some semblance of cover, even if the uneven terrain made his journey excruciating. Every step was agony, each movement sending fresh pain through his ribs. He paused frequently, leaning against tree trunks to catch his breath. The night was eerily quiet, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves or the distant hoot of an owl. "Just keep moving," he told himself, his voice barely above a whisper. One step at a time. The glow of the town grew brighter, a beacon of hope in the darkness. But it felt impossibly far, and his body screamed for rest. He couldn't give in. Not yet. As he stumbled through the underbrush, his mind wandered to Dana. Her laughter, her smile, the way she'd always known how to calm his restless spirit. "You're stronger than you think, Elliot," she'd said during one of his lowest moments years ago. He'd been grappling with whether to accept the position as chief, knowing the challenges that came with it. "They'll push back," he'd argued. "They won't want me there." "And you'll push harder," she'd replied, her voice steady and sure. "Because that's what you do. You fight for what's right, no matter the cost." The memory brought tears to his eyes. He could almost hear her now, urging him forward, telling him to stand tall even when the world tried to knock him down. "Dana," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I hope you're watching. I hope. I'm making you proud." After what felt like an eternity, Elliot emerged from the woods. The streetlights of Braxton glimmered ahead, their warm glow a stark contrast to the cold, dark forest behind him. His legs threatened to give out as he shuffled onto the pavement. The distant sound of cars passing was a reminder that civilization was close, but it also filled him with dread. Who could he trust? If Marcus and Sean were willing to go this far, how many others in the department might be involved? His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of an approaching vehicle. Panic gripped him, and he staggered toward the shadows, pressing himself against a building. The car slowed as it passed, but the driver didn't stop. Relief washed over him, and he stepped back onto the sidewalk, his focus narrowing to one goal: reaching the station. "Almost there," he muttered, each step fueled by a mix of determination and rage. The station wasn't just a destination. It was where this fight would begin, and Elliot Vance wasn't about to back down. The harsh fluorescent lights of the Braxton police station stung Elliot's eyes as he stumbled through the front doors. His vision swam, and his battered body swayed unsteadily. "Chief." The voice came from the front desk officer, a young recruit named Davis. His wide eyes scanned Elliot's bloodied face and torn uniform. "What the hell happened? Are you?" "I need help," Elliot rasped, his voice hoarse. He collapsed against the desk, barely able to hold himself up. "Somebody call an ambulance," Davis shouted, scrambling to support Elliot. Several officers rushed into the lobby, their faces a mixture of shock and confusion. "No ambulance," Elliot croaked, shaking his head. "I'm not leaving here." Minutes later, Elliot sat slumped in a chair in the conference room. His ribs throbbed with every breath, and dried blood caked the side of his face. Lieutenant Frank Andrews entered, his face tight with concern. "Elliot, what the hell happened to you?" Frank asked, his tone hovering between worry and anger. Elliot lifted his head, meeting Frank's gaze. "Marcus Tate and Sean Wilkes. They jumped me out on Route 12. Frank froze. "Marcus and Sean? Our officers? That doesn't make sense. Why would they?" "Because they're dirty, Frank," Elliot interrupted, his voice steady despite the pain. "And I've got proof. A voicemail from one of them before the attack. This wasn't random. They wanted me gone." Murmurs rippled through the room as other officers exchanged uneasy glances. Frank clenched his fists, his jaw tightening. "All right, what do you need me to do?" "I need everyone mobilized," Elliot said firmly. "Those two think they can get away with this. Prove them wrong." As the officers dispersed to follow Elliot's orders, Davis lingered by the doorway, hesitating before speaking. "Chief, can I ask something?" Elliot nodded, motioning for him to continue. "It's just, Marcus and Sean have been here for years. They're not exactly role models, but this? I mean, maybe this was some kind of misunderstanding." "There's no misunderstanding, Davis," Elliot snapped. He softened his tone, seeing the younger man flinch. "I understand your doubt, but I know what I saw. And I know the kind of men we're dealing with. Trust me." Davis nodded, though his expression remained uncertain. "Yes, sir." Frank returned later with a grim look on his face. "We've got a lead." Their patrol car was spotted heading out toward the old service road. Elliot struggled to rise, groaning as the pain in his ribs flared. Frank moved to steady him. "You're in no condition to go anywhere, Chief." "I don't care," Elliot said, gritting his teeth. "I'm not letting them out of my sight." Frank sighed. "Elliot, I've known you a long time. I know you're not going to sit this one out. But you need to trust me. We'll bring them in." Elliot met Frank's gaze, seeing the resolve in his old friend's eyes. Finally, he relented, sinking back into the chair. All right, but you keep me updated. Every step. You have my word, Frank replied, already heading out the door. The station buzzed with activity as officers geared up and patrol cars roared out of the parking lot. Elliot watched from his office window, his good hand gripping the edge of the desk. His phone buzzed with a message from Frank. We've got a trail. We'll update soon. Elliot closed his eyes, exhaling slowly. Despite his injuries, his mind was sharp, replaying every detail of the attack. The voicemail fragment echoed in his ears, proof of something far deeper than two rogue officers. The hunt was on, and Elliot vowed this would be the last time anyone underestimated him. The radio in Lieutenant Frank Andrews' patrol car crackled to life as an officer reported back. We found their car, Lieutenant. It's abandoned near the old service road by Route 18. Frank gripped the steering wheel tighter. The road was remote, surrounded by dense woods, making it the perfect place for Marcus and Sean to hide, or to plan their next move. Copy that, Frank replied. Secure the area. I'm 5 minutes out. Beside him, Officer Davis fidgeted nervously, glancing at Frank. You think they're armed? Frank's jaw tightened. I wouldn't put it past Marcus. Stay alert. This isn't just about catching them. It's about making sure no one else gets hurt. As they pulled onto the narrow gravel road, the beams of their headlights cut through the dark forest, revealing the abandoned patrol car up ahead. Officers were already on the scene, combing the area with flashlights. Spread out, Frank commanded, stepping out of his car. They couldn't have gotten far. Elliot sat at his desk in the station, his ribs aching with every breath. He clutched the edge of the desk, willing himself to focus despite the pain. His phone buzzed. Frank's voice came through. Chief, we've located the suspect's car. It's by the old service road. No sign of them yet. Elliot exhaled sharply. Good work, Frank. Keep me updated. And Frank, bring them in alive. You have my word, Frank assured him. Elliot hung up, staring at the cracked screen of his phone. The voicemail replayed in his mind. We can't let him talk. This was bigger than Marcus and Sean. Someone else was pulling the strings, and Elliot was determined to find out who. Frank's voice cut through the tension of the dark woods. Hold your fire unless absolutely necessary. We need them alive. A shout rang out from deeper in the forest. Over here. I saw movement. Frank and Davis sprinted toward the sound, their flashlights bouncing through the trees. In the clearing ahead, Marcus stood, his hands raised, a smug grin on his face. Well, look who came to play, Marcus sneered. Hands where we can see them, Marcus. Frank barked, training his gun on the officer. Sean emerged from the shadows behind Marcus, his face pale and hands trembling. We didn't mean for it to go this far, Frank, he stammered. Save it, Frank snapped. You'll get your chance to talk back at the station. Now, get on the ground. Marcus hesitated, his grin faltering for a moment before he complied, dropping to his knees. Sean followed suit, his eyes darting nervously as the officers moved in to cuff them. Back at the station, Elliot sat across from Sean in the interrogation room. The younger officer's face was pale, beads of sweat glistening on his brow. Why? Elliot asked, his voice low but firm. Why attack me? What were you trying to hide? Sean's gaze darted to the one-way mirror, his hands shaking. I didn't want to hurt you, Chief. It was Marcus, he said. He said we had no choice. No choice. Elliot pressed, leaning forward despite the pain in his ribs. No choice about what? Sean hesitated, his eyes filling with tears. There's someone higher up. Someone who told Marcus to keep you quiet. They didn't tell me everything, but I overheard Marcus talking about shipments, money. I swear I didn't know it would come to this. Elliot leaned back, his mind racing. Shipments and money? This wasn't just about petty corruption. This was organized. Who's behind it? He demanded. I don't know, Sean cried. Marcus wouldn't tell me. He said it was better if I didn't know. Frank entered the interrogation room after Sean was led away. He placed a small device on the table, a digital recorder pulled from Marcus's belongings during the arrest. Found this in Marcus's pocket, Frank said. You're going to want to hear it. Elliot played the recording, his heart pounding as a familiar voice came through. "Make sure he doesn't come back from that road. We can't risk him digging any deeper." Elliot froze, recognizing the voice instantly. It belonged to Lydia Barnes, the deputy mayor and someone he'd considered an ally. Frank's expression darkened. "Chief, this goes higher than we thought." Elliot nodded, his hands tightening into fists. "Lydia wanted me silenced. But now? Now we bring her world crashing down." Elliot sat behind his desk, his ribs aching as he replayed the audio recording on a loop. Lydia Barnes' voice rang out clearly, the words chilling in their intent. "Make sure he doesn't come back from that road. We can't risk him digging any deeper." A knock on his office door interrupted his thoughts. Deputy Mayor Lydia Barnes stepped in, her expression carefully neutral, but her sharp green eyes probing. "Elliot, I heard about the attack," she began, her voice smooth and sympathetic. "I came to check on you. How are you holding up?" Elliot leaned back, his gaze steady. "I've been better." Lydia perched on the edge of his desk, her polished demeanor unshaken. "This department can't afford to lose you, Elliot. Whatever happened out there, I hope you know you've got my support." Elliot studied her, the weight of her words on the recording contrasting with the concern in her tone. "Funny thing about support," he said slowly. "It doesn't always come from where you expect, or where it should." Lydia tilted her head, a faint frown creasing her forehead. "Are you trying to say something, Elliot?" "Just making an observation," he replied, forcing a smile. "You know how this job is. Full of surprises." As Lydia left, Elliot's smile faded. He clenched his fists, the pain in his ribs flaring as his resolve hardened. She had come to gauge how much he knew. Frank Andrews walked into Elliot's office, a stack of files in hand. He closed the door behind him, lowering his voice. "I pulled the financials you asked for, Chief. You're going to want to see this." Elliot motioned for him to continue, and Frank spread the documents across the desk. "Marcus and Sean both have large, unexplained deposits in their accounts over the last 6 months. Thousands of dollars. Too much for regular bonuses." Elliot's jaw tightened as Frank pointed to another file. "And here's the kicker. Those deposits tie back to a shell company, one linked to campaign funds for Lydia Barnes." The connection clicked in Elliot's mind, each piece falling into place. "She's running a smuggling operation," he muttered. "Drugs, weapons. Something big enough to buy silence and loyalty." Frank nodded grimly. "She's been using Marcus and Sean to enforce her network, and you were a threat. That's why they tried to take you out." Elliot's eyes burned with fury. "Not tried, Frank. Failed." Elliot waited for Lydia in her office, his calm mask concealing the storm brewing beneath. When she entered, her practiced smile faltered at the sight of him. "Elliot," she greeted, recovering quickly. "What brings you here?" "I thought we should talk," Elliot said, holding up the financial records. "You've been busy." Lydia's expression remained composed, but her eyes narrowed. "I don't know what you're insinuating, but I don't appreciate being ambushed." Elliot stood, towering over her. "Don't play coy, Lydia. I know about the shell company, the payoffs, the orders you gave to Marcus and Sean. You're running an operation, and you tried to bury me to protect it." Lydia's smile vanished, replaced by a hard glare. "Careful, Elliot. You're making accusations you can't prove." Elliot leaned in, his voice low and cold. "The difference between you and me is that I've already started proving it. Your voice is on a recording, and I'm not stopping until the whole town knows what you've done." Lydia's facade cracked, anger flashing in her eyes. "You think you're some kind of hero? You can't win this. I've built this town, Elliot. It survives because of me." "No," Elliot said, his voice steady. "It survives in spite of you, and your time is up." Later that evening, Elliot met with an officer who had reached out anonymously. Sergeant Laura Mitchell, one of the few officers in Braxton who had consistently aligned with his reform efforts. "I'm risking everything by coming to you," Laura said, her voice low as they sat in the shadows of a quiet diner. "But you need to know what Lydia's been doing." "Tell me everything," Elliot urged. Laura handed him a folder. "Lydia's been using her influence to cover smuggling routes through Braxton. Drugs, illegal arms, you name it. She's funneled money through campaign donors and used officers like Marcus to enforce her network. Elliot scanned the documents, his fury building with each page. Why didn't you come forward sooner? Laura looked down, guilt flickering in her eyes. I was scared. People who get in Lydia's way, they disappear. But after what happened to you, I couldn't stay silent. You did the right thing, Elliot said, placing a hand on her shoulder. But now we need to act. Armed with the new evidence, Elliot and Frank confronted the mayor the next morning, laying out the details of Lydia's corruption. The mayor's face paled as he reviewed the files. We can't sweep this under the rug, Elliot said firmly. She's been operating in plain sight, using this town as her personal empire. This ends now. Reluctantly, the mayor nodded. I'll authorize her arrest. But Elliot, this is going to shake the foundation of Braxton. Are you ready for that? Elliot's gaze was unflinching. Braxton needs to be shaken. It's the only way we can rebuild. As the arrest warrant was signed, Elliot felt the weight of the betrayal settle over him. Lydia had been someone he trusted, someone he believed in, but now she would face justice, not just for her crimes, but for the lives she had tried to destroy. Elliot sat at his desk, the recording of Lydia's damning words playing on a loop through the small speakers. Frank leaned against the doorframe, his arms crossed. She's connected to everything, Elliot said, his voice low but resolute. The shell company, the money trails, and Marcus and Sean's orders. Frank nodded. We've got enough to implicate her, but this isn't just about Lydia. Her arrest is going to ripple through the department and the town. Elliot exhaled, his ribs aching with each breath. This town has survived worse. We need to finish this, no matter the cost. Frank unfolded his arms, stepping closer. And what about you, Chief? Once this goes public, it won't just be her reputation on trial. You'll be dragged into it too. Elliot met his gaze. I'm not hiding, Frank. We expose the truth, no matter what it costs me. The briefing room buzzed with tension as officers gathered, some uneasy, others angry. Elliot stood at the front, his injuries still visible but his voice steady. We've uncovered evidence of corruption at the highest levels, Elliot began. This isn't just about Marcus and Sean. Deputy Mayor Lydia Barnes has been using this department to protect her smuggling operation. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Officer Davis stood, his voice sharp. Chief, if this gets out, it'll destroy the department's reputation. How do we recover from that? Elliot's eyes hardened. By holding ourselves accountable. If we let this slide, we're no better than the criminals we're supposed to stop. Another officer, Sergeant Mitchell, spoke up. He's right. We swore to serve and protect, not to cover for corruption. It's time we start acting like it. The room fell into a tense silence. Elliot scanned the faces of his officers, gauging their reactions. Justice doesn't come without cost, Elliot said. But if we don't do this, we lose everything we stand for. Elliot stood at the podium in the town square, the weight of the moment pressing heavily on his shoulders. The crowd gathered before him was a mix of community members, journalists, and city officials. For too long, Elliot began. This town has suffered from a system designed to protect the powerful at the expense of the people. That ends today. He recounted the evidence, laying bare the extent of Lydia's corruption. Gasps and murmurs swept through the crowd as he revealed her ties to smuggling and her role in orchestrating the attack against him. We cannot rebuild trust without transparency, Elliot continued. As your chief of police, I promise to ensure that justice is served, no matter where it leads. A reporter raised her hand. Chief Vance, how do you respond to claims that this will cripple the department? Elliot's gaze was unwavering. Sometimes we have to tear down what's broken to build something stronger. Lydia Barnes' office was eerily quiet as Elliot and Frank entered, flanked by two officers. Lydia stood by her desk, her expression carefully composed. I assume you're here to make a scene, she said, her voice icy. No scene, Lydia, Elliot replied. Just justice. He stepped forward, handing her the warrant. Her calm facade cracked as she read the charges, her fingers trembling. This is a mistake, she hissed. You're destroying this town. No, Elliot said firmly. I'm saving it. The officers stepped forward to cuff her. Lydia's mask of composure shattered, and she turned to Elliot, her eyes blazing. "You think you've won? You'll regret this." Elliot didn't flinch. "The only thing I regret is trusting you." Back at the station, Elliot sat alone in his office, the adrenaline of the day finally fading. The walls felt heavier, the silence oppressive. He stared at the photo of Dana on his desk, her smile a beacon in the chaos. Frank knocked lightly on the door before entering. "It's done, Chief. She's in custody, and the town knows the truth." Elliot nodded, but his expression remained somber. "We've pulled the thread, Frank. The whole fabric's going to unravel." Frank sat across from him, his tone softer. Maybe it needed to. Sometimes the only way forward is through. Elliot's gaze shifted to the window, the faint glow of the town lights visible in the distance. "This isn't the end," he said quietly. "It's just the beginning." Frank smiled faintly. "Then let's make sure it's a good one." As Frank left, Elliot leaned back in his chair, the weight of the day settling on his shoulders. The fight for justice had come at a cost, but he knew it was a price worth paying. Elliot sat alone in his office, the soft glow of a desk lamp casting long shadows on the walls. The events of the past weeks weighed heavily on him. Lydia's arrest, the fractures within the department, and the fallout from his public revelations. A resignation letter sat on the desk in front of him, unsigned but neatly typed. His gaze lingered on it as he thought of Dana's voice, always urging him to persevere. A knock broke his thoughts. Frank stepped inside, his expression a mix of concern and respect. "You're really thinking about stepping down?" Frank asked, his tone quiet. "I've been considering it," Elliot admitted. "This department, this town, they deserve a leader who isn't constantly in the crosshairs." Frank shook his head, pulling up a chair. "They need you now more than ever, Elliot. You've done what no one else was willing to do. You've torn out the rot. But rebuilding? That takes someone with your spine." Elliot exhaled, glancing at the resignation letter. After a long moment, he folded it in half and dropped it into the trash. "All right, let's rebuild." The next morning, Elliot stood at the podium in the briefing room, addressing the assembled officers. Tension hung thick in the air, but Elliot's voice was steady. "Starting today, this department changes," he began. "We will rebuild trust, not just with this community, but with ourselves. That means accountability, transparency, and a commitment to justice, no matter the cost." He outlined new policies, mandatory cultural sensitivity training, stricter oversight on the use of force, and a whistleblower program to encourage officers to speak out against corruption. "This isn't just about reforming a department," Elliot continued. "It's about proving to the people of Braxton that we're here to serve and protect them. All of them." As he finished, there was a long silence before Sergeant Mitchell stood. "You've got my support, Chief. Let's do this." One by one, other officers voiced their agreement. The room felt lighter, the first glimmer of hope breaking through. A few days later, Elliot visited the county jail where Marcus and Sean were being held. Sitting across from them in the sterile meeting room, Elliot's expression was unreadable. "You wanted power," Elliot said, his voice calm but firm. "But power without integrity is nothing." Sean avoided his gaze, shame etched across his face. Marcus, however, leaned back in his chair, his bravado intact. "You think you've won, Chief? You've just scratched the surface. There's always someone else pulling strings." "Maybe," Elliot admitted, "but I'm not going to stop. Not for people like you." Marcus smirked. "You'll burn out. They always do." Elliot leaned forward, his voice dropping. "The difference between you and me is that I'm not afraid of the fight. Enjoy your time here, Marcus. It's all you've got left." Later that week, Elliot walked through the Braxton town square, stopping to speak with residents. A mother approached him, her young daughter holding her hand. "Thank you, Chief," she said softly, "for standing up for us, for doing what's right." Elliot crouched down, smiling at the little girl. "We're all in this together," he said. "You deserve to grow up in a town you can be proud of." As he stood, the woman added, "Dana would be proud of you." Her words struck a chord, and Elliot nodded, his throat tight. "Thank you," he managed. On a quiet evening, Elliot stepped into a garage where a gleaming black 1972 Mustang awaited him. Frank had worked with the community to restore it, a symbol of hope and resilience. Elliot slid into the driver's seat, the familiar leather and the purr of the engine bringing a rare smile to his face. He drove through Braxton, the wind rushing through the open windows, the road stretching out before him. The fight wasn't over. There were still wounds to heal and trust to rebuild. But as Elliot gripped the wheel, he felt ready. The road ahead was long, but he was determined to face it 1 mile at a time.